Pretty pumped about this series, this little mini series that we're doing in between elements, because we're going to talk about push weeks. And we just got to do one from August the 7th to August the 14th in the Portland metro area, and participated with multiple cities in Oregon where we came together to do a push week. Logged over 1,000 hours among the lost in 1 week. And you guys, it was extraordinary and it was awesome and so encouraging that we just felt like we needed to take a couple weeks to share the story of what God's doing, but also encourage everybody at whatever phase you are at in this journey of disciple making to set aside some time and intentionally plan doing push weeks. So I just want to take a couple minutes today to kind of lay the groundwork for the next few weeks. Like, what is a push week? What's different about it than your regular disciple making habits, and why can they be so effective? So a push week is essentially a season of time where you raise all 7 sails and you go after it with intensity in ways that maybe you couldn't do every week. So when you think about going out among the lost, extraordinary prayer times, intentionally seeing groups start, the follow-up that goes with that, and just setting aside a much larger amount of time than maybe you could do every week to really press into what God is doing. So we did that. When I think of a push week, I think of like Luke chapter 10, when Jesus sent out the 72, and he sent them ahead of him to every town and place where he was about to go. He told them the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest to send workers into the harvest field. And he said, go, I'm sending you out. And the 72, did they send 72 every day? Probably not. But I think this is a great example of there has to be seasons and times where we say, we're going to create margin. We're all going to come together in unity, and we're going to do a push week together. And so I'm going to be sharing with you through this series a little bit of what God did through our push week, August the 7th through the 14th, which we just wrapped it up. And also some of the incredible things that God answers to prayer, groups that have started from that, and just share a little bit more, of the journey of what we're doing. So to kind of get the ball rolling, Jim Britz is going to probably share during this series. I hope he shares during the series when he gets back. But he was telling us about a push week in northern India where he's at, I think. And they sent out 10,000 pairs of disciples on June the 24th. Can you guys imagine that? 10,000 pairs of disciples. And since June 24th, they've seen thousands of new churches started. And he's right in the middle of it. And we're going to hopefully hear some of the amazing stories from that, or maybe even have to do a mini series knowing Jim on the heels of this before we get into one of the elements. But when you think of increased activity, sending 10,000 people out, there's something that is unique that can take place, momentum that can take place in unity when we're all doing it together. I was sharing with our team preparing for our push week, if we all go out as individuals, you go out with a pair, or maybe your generation 0 or 1 or 2 church goes out among the lost. There could be 15 or 20 of you that go out. And if you go out for a couple hours, that's awesome. And that is a habit that we definitely want in our life. But what is it like if you go out with 50 people, 3 hours twice in one day, 2 3-hour segments? Well, you're multiplying hours among the lost in a radical way. If you did that 1 hour a week for 52 weeks, you're not going to have very many hours among the lost. But if you're saying, hey, we're going to set aside 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, we did 7 days, and you're going to spend 2 to 3 hours twice a day among the lost, with on average 24 disciples went out every day for 6 hours. It was a different, crew each time, but we logged a ton of hours among the lost. So you can imagine all those extra spiritual conversations, engagements, the people we prayed for, the miracles that we were asking God to answer. There was just more activity, and with more activity came more results. So here's kind of a quick synopsis of our push week. And a little bit later in the series, I'm going to give you a copy of our itinerary, not because I want you to mimic it, but just to give you a template to say, what would this look like if we did a push week, in our city, in our region, in our area. So our whole team prayed and fasted leading into the push week. And probably more intensely than we've ever fasted in our entire journey of doing DMM. The amount of people who fasted a 24-hour period or longer leading into our push week was inspiring. Also, during that time, I already mentioned this, but I think it's important to recognize that we did it for 7 days, and we were out at a minimum 3 hours twice a day for 6 of those days. So if you think of what that was like, we had 22 people fly in from across the United States from other cities to join us in our push week. And they joined about 50 of the Portland area disciple makers who participated for at least a half a day. So we had 50 different disciple makers participate for at least one half a day during the push week. And we opened it up with a training night that helped everybody who was flying in and all of the people that we were working with, because there was people on our team, but we also unified with any disciple maker that was willing to join us during this journey. And we did a training where on the opening night of the push week, which is we're raising one of the sails, right? Because this is training people. We helped everybody craft their 15-second story. And then we helped them transition it into crafting their 30-second story. And then we role played it for an entire night together at a coffee shop. So everyone practiced it. And then in order to get your meal that night, which we went to food trucks, Portland's the food truck capital of America. And before we took off to the food trucks, we told everybody, you have to go share your story twice with somebody before you can order your food. And right out of the gate, we're like, we're going to have people practice this 15-second story and see what God does in the midst of that. And not surprisingly, God was faithful. And that opening night, a couple of people shared their stories and got to pray with somebody just while they were going to get their food 3 blocks from where we were training people. And then, so we trained them. We sent at least 50 disciple makers plus the 22 people who flew in out among the lost. We logged over 1,000 hours in 1 week. And in addition to the time among the lost, we had extra prayer times where people came together, awesome and fun meals together, and cookouts where people just came and celebrated and shared stories of what God was doing. And we sprinkled in some fun excursions. So we have waterfalls within 30 minutes of Portland. So we all went with a huge group of people. The people on the trail probably hated us because there was like 70 of us hiking to go see a waterfall. And we challenged everybody that you had to go underneath the waterfall or you're not a real disciple maker. So, we had some crazy fun in the midst of it. And I will say this, I think sometimes as Christians, we're all business. And we need to recognize that there's joy in the journey, you guys. So we would start the day off at an iconic donut place in Portland or a coffee roasting company. And then we'd pray together in a park. And then we had maps mobilized where we would send people out to the areas where we were going among the lost. So my favorite evening, I'm going to tell you 2 stories. And then we'll get into a few details, and then we're going to use the rest of the series to really break down what did we do and how did we do it. There was a night where we went over to Vancouver, Washington, which is a part of the Portland metro area, just on the other side of the Columbia River. And Chris Christopherson is almost always on this coaching call. I don't know if he's on here today. I haven't seen his name yet, but he's almost always on here. He and his wife, Karen, are over in Vancouver, the only disciple makers that I know of in that area so far. And he's in my coaching group. They prayer walk their neighborhood and have spiritual conversations and have adopted an apartment complex where they've been prayer walking. And I'll just tell you, a shout out to Chris. His faithfulness and persistence in going out among the lost is inspiring. And through the entire time that he has been doing disciple making, he's fasted, he's been diligent, but he had yet to find a person of peace. So one of the things that we did during this push week because we're not about building our kingdom, we're about building Jesus's kingdom. We took people in 15 passenger vans to different areas of the Portland metro area where we knew people had already laid the groundwork and been persistent. And we said, we're going to come alongside you, have a meal with you, and do this together as a team and just see what God does. And so we took a team over there. We had a meal with Chris and Karen in a park. We went to that apartment complex, and right out of the gate, we mobilized the team. We sent people out in pairs. And my wife and I were walking together. We talked to a gal named Sabrina. Literally, we said, hey, we're out just encouraging our neighbors tonight and loving on people. And we just wanted to know if there's any way we could pray for you or if you need a miracle in your life. And you guys, like, she just busted out crying instantly. And we entered into this spiritual conversation with her, which was awesome. While we were doing that, another pair just across the way, and I snapped a picture with my phone because while we were talking to Sabrina, I look over and I see this happening. And they had felt led by the Holy Spirit to knock on that apartment complex door. And a guy comes to the door, and they get in a spiritual conversation with them. And he basically just shares with them, hey, man, I don't even know if I can keep my family together anymore. Our whole family's kind of a hot mess. They start leading this guy, Chuko, to Jesus right there on the front door and start praying for him. And he was super open to it. And he brought a couple other family members out. While that was happening, this is all within 1 hour. There was another pair of disciples behind that building on the basketball courts of the apartment complex. And they start talking to these teenagers, and these teenagers are like talking to them openly while they're playing basketball about the fact that they don't want to be in their apartment anymore. They don't want to be around their family. They hate the environment that they're in. And so these two disciple makers said, well, hey, would you take us to your family so that we could pray for your family? And so the teenagers are like, yeah, sure, whatever. And so they lead these pair of disciple makers around the corner. And when they come around the corner, they see that this pair of disciple makers is already leading their dad to Jesus. So that same story is now coming to fruition. And so this is all within 1 hour, you guys. And while that was happening, Chris and Karen, and again, Chris is on our coaching call here, had not found a person of peace yet. And they were walking together in the same apartment complex. And a guy pulls up in his car, and it was just smoking like crazy. His tire was flat. He'd been driving on it for miles. He was drunk. And so he gets out of the car, and Chris starts having this conversation with him, and he can't understand a word that he's saying. What we thought was his wife at that time comes out on the balcony and starts talking to them. And while she's talking to them, Chris just gets bold and says, hey, are you his wife? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, come down here because we're getting ready to pray for your whole family. So she's like, okay. And so she comes down, and this gal, they just start praying and sharing with her while they're there. And Chris just got like, I love Chris because he's an engineer. And so he was just like, hey, this is the reason we're here. There's this passage of scripture in the Bible, and it just talks about how some people are ready for change, and they're willing to open up their house, their family, and their life to the things of God. And if they do that, God's going to change their whole family. And we're just wondering if you're one of those people. And she looks at Chris and she's like, I am. And so they get in this spiritual conversation. They talk about Discovery Bible Study. They're trying to include the drunk husband in it. While they're having the conversation, the 21-year-old daughter pulls up in her car. She gets out of the car. The mom starts telling the 21-year-old daughter why Chris and Karen are there. And when she gets to the end of explaining why Chris and Karen are there, the 21-year-old daughter says, well, it's about time. And she's totally open to it. And she goes, knocks on another apartment door and brings a couple other family members out. And to make a long story short, that next Friday night, Chris and Karen got to go into that apartment, do their first Discovery Bible study since they've been doing DMM with people. And the whole family was there. And while they were at the apartment, Chris said, hey, in addition to doing Discovery Bible Study, because they were asking, well, how does this work? Do we come to your house? Or, and Chris was like, no, I'm going to come to your house and I'm going to show you how to do this. We're going to do one together. And then the next time you guys are going to do it, and I'm going to start coaching you. And he goes, and by the way, in this passage of scripture that I was talking about, it says that I'm supposed to eat with you. So I'm not just coming to do Discovery Bible Study. I'm coming for dinner on Friday night. And Karen, Chris's wife, is like, you can't just invite yourself to dinner. And they were like, that's great. And they start planning the menu and inviting them in. And so we had in one night, 4 households open up to the things of God. Now, to give you guys a report of these 1,000 hours among the lost, we had 29 homes open up to Discovery Bible Study in 1 week. God was so faithful. And as we followed up with them, I grabbed another picture. I'm trying to collect pictures of what God's doing in the midst of it. This is Dylan right here. Some of you guys met him at the April gathering with eLife down in Lubbock. Dylan and Lily are getting ready to move to Thailand to do DMM. And this couple that's in the middle, they met them during the push week. And when they reached out to them, they asked them, had a spiritual conversation with them and started talking to them about Discovery Bible Study. And they seemed super open. But when Dylan and Lily followed up with them, they would never return their phone calls or their text messages. So we had coached them at the beginning of the week. Hey, the beauty of going to homes and not a public place is you know where people live. And so they were like, they just had some extra time a couple of weeks ago in an evening, and they're like, hey, they're not responding to our text messages. Let's just show up at their house. So they just showed up at their house again. Sure enough that they were home. And when they came to the door, the gal was like, I can't believe you came back. After all of the text messages that you sent me, I never responded to one of them. And that was the thing that sealed the deal in her heart, because many evangelists had come across her path over the years, and they had a one-time experience and said they were going to follow up, and none of them did. But because Dylan and Lily followed up, they were so moved by that they invited them in, had food together, did a Discovery Bible Study. And because Dylan and Lily are getting ready to move to Thailand, they brought Michael and Grace Lukeman over to their house so that they could introduce them to them, because they're going to pick up on the follow-up and continue the Discovery Bible Study. So they've met 3 times together in just sharing what God's going to do. So during this series, we're going to talk about how do you lay the groundwork. This is next week for tracking disciple-making habits. How do you die to yourself and enter into unity and collaboration? One of the things we focused on was partnering with any disciple maker in our city that was willing to do the push week together. Didn't matter their form, whether they wanted to lead with sharing the gospel, whether they wanted to start with Discovery Bible Study. In fact, when we would come along a disciple maker, if we were in their neighborhood on their turf, we would do their form their way. And so sometimes we were doing a house of peace search where we would literally knock on doors the whole 3 hours that we were out. And some people are like, well, I don't like that form. I don't care. Be united and do whatever it is that the disciple makers that are working in that area want you to do. And I'll tell you why, you guys, I've fallen in love with house of peace searching. Of all the ways that I've gone out among the lost, street festivals, farmers markets, parks, public places, to me, the most fruitful experience of our push week was going door to door where the Spirit led us and doing it just like they did it in Luke chapter 10 and doing a house of peace search. We were invited into apartments and homes. We had, people offered us Cokes. We had team members that had meals with people on their very first time meeting them. And we were, in some ways, I'll be honest with you, shocked that Luke chapter 10 works exactly the way that Jesus said that it would work. And we got to stop being chicken and start just being obedient and trusting that God has gone before us in the midst of it. So also during this series, week 4, we're going to talk about the double blessing and the importance of follow-up and some scriptural stories of the importance of that. And then last week, we're going to talk about extraordinary prayer. It breaks the strongholds and empowers everything that we do. So the last thing I want to say today, and then if you've got any questions, just general questions about a push week, I'd be happy to try to answer those. And I know Wayne was a part of the push week. He's on here. I don't know if there's any other Oregon folks that are on today, but if any of you guys want to make a comment, Russ, I see you are on here. Chris is on here. So if you guys want to just share, Chris, if you want to just give a little, 2-minute blurb on what God's doing in your heart and how it affected you, I would welcome you to do that as well. But the last thing that I wanted to say is a lot of people are like, hey, let's just plan a push week and we'll just do it. And being obedient and doing it is great. I just want you to know that there were tons of hours of prayer that led into it. I had many, many meals with other disciple makers to break down the walls so that we could be unified and be one as Jesus asked us to be one. I died to myself and to a lot of the forms that maybe I was comfortable with to partner with other disciple makers and walk together. And I think God blessed that. And there's just a lot of things that I learned through the journey that when we come together, God can do something extraordinary. And so we're excited just to see what God's going to do in the future. And maybe we'll land in some of your cities and come alongside you with the group of disciple makers in the days ahead. And I think that'd be super cool. But I want you to know, just getting a plane ticket and showing up and doing it isn't all there is to it. And that's why we're going to divide just take the next couple of weeks here to really press into what would it look like to prepare for a push week and to allow God to have freedom in the midst of that. Hey, Chris, you want to just share? You're leading your first Discovery Bible studies ever. You want to pop in and share for a moment?
Sure, I can do that. Hey, thank you. And my name is Chris. I'm in Vancouver, Washington. And yeah, that was an exciting time we had during the push week. I want to answer Becky's question. She asked if it was Pipsy neighborhood. And I specifically got a map of the city of Vancouver to locate where the Pipsiest Pipsy neighborhoods were in the whole city. And I live just 1 mile down the road from one. I mean, I'm in a neighborhood, but the apartment complexes that are right next to me. And then there's a homeless camp next to that. And so I'm kind of in an industrial area. And so really close to me is one of the areas in the city. If you're looking for a Pipsy area, that's where it is. It's those apartments that we went to. And so also with my neighborhood, there was such a big difference between meeting with my neighbors, having spiritual conversations with my neighbors, bringing them over for dinner. They really didn't have anything else to do with follow-up or anything else. Even my Christian neighbors really are not interested in really doing anything. But such a big difference just being over there a mile away in that apartment complex neighborhood. And just with the type of people that are over there, it's just totally different. And so just that one time we went over there, we were able to find somebody that was more open than all of the work that we've done, in our neighborhood. And then also we've gone to the park next to our neighborhood too, but that park attracts people from all of the city of Vancouver. And so just focusing on this one apartment complex that is the Pipsy area in Vancouver, I think really made a difference. And it was just exciting to see God do something, because we hadn't pre-planned anything or strategized except for what Brent was saying, praying and fasting. And we were just standing there in the parking lot, and we were talking to people, and we were talking to somebody already when Jose rolled up in his car with his flat tire. And then that guy left and we went on talking to him. But just the whole thing was just amazing how it felt together with nothing that we really did. And just having my wife there with me was really good, because she's just amazed. Almost every time we've gone out, not in our neighborhood, we've had kind of the same experience where we always meet people that are more open than we thought they'd ever be. But so we met with that family for 3 times. So we'll be on our 4th time this next week. They've already invited their neighbors. They already have a neighbor that was reading one of the Bible stories. And so within a very short period of time, found a person apiece, met with their family, and they're already inviting their neighbors, which is to me pretty amazing how quickly it happened, how quickly and open they were to talk about what we were doing. It's been amazing.
So awesome. And I just want to again give a shout out to Chris. and Karen, because of all the week of the push week, I'll tell you the apartment complex that was the most open was the one that had the most prayer invested into it. And they had laid the groundwork, and there was a clear difference in that apartment complex compared to many of the places that we went. Couple questions that I see on here. Chris and Lisa asked, are the 15, 30-second stories you mentioned Bible stories? Both and yes. We taught people how to share 15-second Bible stories and 30-second Bible stories, but we also helped people craft their own story and keeping it super simple. Like, what was your pain point? Who were you before Jesus? What did Jesus do in your life? And who are you after Jesus? And give all the credit to Jesus through the whole thing. And those stories got used a lot during the push week. And what we found is most of the people had no idea how to share a 15-second testimony. And to role play it out multiple times helped them craft it. Every time we role played it, they get better and better. And we saw people use those stories. And you guys, my son got to lead somebody to Jesus for the first time in his entire life during the push week. And so as a dad, good grief, I couldn't have asked for more. Becky, you asked about failures during the push week. Oh, absolutely. I mean, you guys, we got rejected hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And we just kept saying, like every time somebody rejects you, it isn't personal. And there's something that was beautiful about it. When you go out and do what Jesus said to do in Matthew 9 and 10 and Luke 10, what those passages of scripture promise us is this: the worst thing that could happen to you is that the peace comes back on you. So when you go out and you offer peace to somebody, how can I pray for you? We're out encouraging you, we're doing a miracle, and they reject it. Where's that peace coming back? It's coming back on you. And everyone, even when we faced rejection, we'd come back at the end of each 2 to 3 hour block. And we always took the time to come back together as a team and share stories and encourage one another. And everybody was always encouraged every time. And it's because the scripture is true. Even when you face the rejection, the peace is coming back on you. Bradley asked, could you give an example of a 50 to 30-second testimony and Bible story? I'll just give you one that I use my own personal one, Bradley, and that's, hey, for so long in my life, I was incredibly prideful. And because of that selfishness that comes with pride, I was constantly turning to my own desires, and selfishness and pride causes you to create bad habits in your life. And those bad habits start creating a downward spiral that really creates pain to your relationships and areas of your life. And Jesus showed me that he loved me just the way that I was, and that I didn't have to be a chronic people pleaser, which is usually what pride is. And that's what it was for me. And he set me free from people pleasing. And because I'm free from people pleasing, I no longer have to deal with that pride. Do you have a story like that in your life? And little simple stories like that really make a difference once you get into a spiritual conversation with somebody. And everyone's can be unique to you, to your story and to your life. Any other questions? Did I miss anything on here? And anyone else that was a part of the push week want to say anything before we break into groups? All right. You guys, I'm a massive fan of push weeks. I think everybody should do one. We did some small ones leading up to this. Don't feel like you have to have 50, 60, 70 people to do it, or that you need people to fly in from across the United States. All you really need to do a push week is a handful of people that says, we're going to increase activity in all 7 sales, and we're going to set aside some extra time to go out. That increased activity, God's going to see it and he's going to bless it. And I just want to encourage you to create margin and get your first push week scheduled. Take imperfect action. Don't wait for everything to be perfect. Just obey, and God's going to do the rest.